Good morning, our esteemed guests online, our distinguished speakers and panelists, patrons and council members of the Chamber. I warmly welcome everyone to today's Advocacy Roundtable. My name is Anne Renu. I am the chair of the Advocacy Committee for the Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce, and I'm indeed honored and delighted to moderate today's session. I can assure you that we promise you an interactive, impactful, and insightful session on the Africa Continental Free Trade Zone area. Our theme today will after agreement, revolutionize the Nigerian economy. And within the Advocacy Committee, our aim is to provide relevant information as we explore trade and investment opportunities. Just to remind us, we would kick off by taking the national anthems for the Nigerian and the British countries. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please be seated as we proceed with the program for today. I would like to draw attention and remind us of our webinar guidelines. Please, if your Zoom volume is too low, check your system volume. Important to recognize we're recording this event, and please do remember to submit all your questions, your comments on the Q&A icon. We will be collating these questions and as much as possible, go through them during the course of today's events. So sit tight and have a great time with us. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome everyone to the event once again. I'd kick off by welcoming and introducing the 15th President of the Chairman of the Council of the Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Kayode Falowo, who is also the Chairman of Greenwich Trust Group, a leading investment bank. He's a distinguished and accomplished gentleman who, during his time in office, has transformed the Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce. Today, he will be ably represented by the Deputy President, a wonderful lady, Mrs. Bisi Adeyemi, who is also the Managing Director of DCSL Corporate Services Limited. She's also a non-executive director on the board of the Center for Women's Health and Information amongst other organizations. Welcome, Mrs. Adeyemi. We will be spending an hour with us today. And finally, may I request that we again remind you to post all your questions and comments on the chat box. Over to you, Mrs. Adeyemi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rino, and welcome everyone. On behalf of the Chairman of Council and President of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Kayode Falowo, I welcome today our dear patrons, council members, members of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm indeed delighted to welcome you all to this roundtable themed after Will the Agreement Revolutionize the Nigerian Economy, organized by the Advocacy Committee of the Chamber. I especially recognize our patrons and council members who have joined us at this event. We do not take your presence with us today for granted. The Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce is a bilateral organization whose main objective is to foster trade and investment relations between Nigeria and the United Kingdom. It is an affiliate of the British Chamber of Commerce, which gives our members access to a network of 53 chambers across the UK and 71 other affiliates across the world. Membership of the NBCC is currently about 350 top corporate organizations from all sectors in the economy of Nigeria and Britain. May I invite all those who are not yet members of the NBCC to commence by visiting our website and filling the membership forms. Upon completion of the process of admission, you will have access to the tremendous benefits associated with membership of Nigeria's foremost bilateral chamber of commerce. Now to the roundtable discussion for today. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is a flagship project of Agenda 2063 of the African Union, approved by the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in January 2012. The agreement brings together all 55 member states of the African Union, covering a market of more than 1.2 billion people, including a growing middle class and a combined GDP of more than $3.4 trillion. The objectives of the agreement include creating a single liberalized market of goods and services, laying the foundation for the establishment of the Continental Customs Union at a later date, attaining a sustainable and inclusive socio-economic development, gender equality and structural transformation, and enhancing the competitiveness of the economies of the state parties within the continent and the global market, amongst others. The agreement as well aims to accelerate intra-African trade and boost Africa's trading position in the global market by strengthening a unified voice and policy space in global trade negotiations. Most certainly, AfCFTA presents economic integration that will require structural changes for it to succeed, as well as increased competition, improved GDP and income per capita in the economies of its member countries. Today's discussion is very timely and appropriate following Nigeria's ratification of AfCFTA and 6 months of the commencement of trading under the agreement. The speakers will discuss the benefits of the world's largest free trade area to the Nigerian economy and how Nigeria is poised to gain from the investment and trade opportunities that AfCFTA presents. On behalf of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, I'm delighted to introduce and welcome our top-class speakers, and I'm very confident that they will do justice in addressing the theme of today's event. Mr. Francis Anatogu is the Secretary of the National Action Committee on AfCFTA and the Senior Special Assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on policies and programs related to trade and complementary policies. He was also the Secretary of the Presidential Committee on the Impact and Readiness Assessment of the AfCFTA. In that role, he coordinated the advocacy, decision analysis, and stakeholder engagements that resulted in Nigeria joining the African Continental Free Trade Area. Demita Yang is a Senior Advisor Customs at the AfCFTA Secretariat. She's a trade expert and negotiator with over 15 years experience in trade policy making and trade negotiations. She was instrumental to Nigeria's effective participation of the AfCFTA Phase 1 negotiations, having chaired the dedicated session of AfCFTA chief trade negotiators that negotiated the protocol on trade in goods and negotiating forums. She was also instrumental to Nigeria's adoption of the agreement. Ken Okpara is an executive director at Fidelity Bank PLC. He has over 29 years experience in banking at various financial institutions. He has held senior management positions in the industry, including divisional head, managed SMEs, multilateral agencies and trade missions, division head SMEs, electronic and consumer banking, head private and consumer banking, head affinity banking, corporate and commercial banking. I'd like to recognize the fact that Fidelity Bank is one of our premium members at the NBCC. Akinbiyi A. Abudu is an accomplished tax consultant and business leader with an enviable track record of professional excellence. He is a current tax leader for EY West Africa and a partner in international tax and transaction service line with more than 20 years experience in the professional tax field. His areas of specialization include, but are not limited to, international and cross-border related tax matters, tax planning and compliance, mergers and acquisition, transfer pricing, tax structuring, and tax advocacy. Olaoluwa Ajala heads the corporate commercial group of Advocate Law Practice. He has vast experience in real estate investments, offshore acquisitions and investments, estate planning, and immigration matters. He has advised both local and international clients, including financial investors, private equity houses, and corporate banks on various commercial transactions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers as we expect from them a very enlightening and informative session. Finally, I wish to appreciate our media partners for their support and also thank the Chamber's Advocacy Committee for organizing this roundtable. I thank you all for your attention. I will now hand over to Ms. Anne Renu, Chairperson of our Advocacy Committee, as well as Head Property Nigeria and West Africa Standard Chartered Bank, who will be moderating this session. Thank you very much, Ms. Renu. Over to you.
Thank you very much, our Deputy Vice President, for a great and welcome address. We're going to kick off our session today. And again, a warm welcome to our distinguished guest speakers and of course our panelists. You are the subject matter experts. You are the reason why the 300 and something odd people have joined this morning to listen to you. And I'm sure that we will be going away with very valuable information and next steps in our respective organizations. So I'll kick off with Mr. Francis Anatogu. In your role and capacity as the Secretary, National Action Committee on AfCFTA. You're very well placed for that, and welcome and thank you. Before we kick off with questions, we would ask each of you to spend about 2-3 minutes giving us your opening remarks. So kick off with Mr. Francis Anatogu. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be with you this morning to talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Indeed, this is one agreement that has potential to prepare us adequately for the long term, for the post-oil world, because it's focused on diversifying our economy and focused on non-oil as well. So really the way we are looking at it is that it has the potential to make every state in Nigeria economically viable. And it has the potential to create jobs at every level. And indeed, we have to give it our best. Now, but it wouldn't just happen that easily. This is a very ambitious project. We are talking about liberalizing 90% of product lines, and we're talking about harmonizing regulations, policies and regulations across African countries to get the advantage of the AfCFTA. So there's a lot of work that has to be done, especially also given the state of our operating environment. So a lot needs to be done. A lot is being done, but ultimately this is a critical program for Nigeria and for the rest of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Anatogu. I'll move on to our lady, Mrs. Demita Yang. Please give us your opening brief.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you. And thank you to NBCC, for the invite to the AfCFTA Secretariat. I will start by just saying, yes, the African Continental Free Trade Area can revolutionize the Nigerian economy. And with a few facts. So from a market of 200 million to a market of 1.2 billion, and having access to 54 signatories as of date, with 37 having deposited their instruments of ratification. The AfCFTA is the one single instrument within the African Union that has gathered such political will. And it is because those who are the founding fathers did understand that this is one way out of poverty. If you go to what the World Bank report says, a recent study, it tells you that it has the potential to leave 100 million out of poverty by 2035. 2035, because that's when the agreement will be fully implemented. And then it also has that potential to breach the gender parity. You know, we'll have more women earning more. You know, you have more women being able to participate. And then it is an agreement that would double. It has the potential to double intra-Africa trade, up to 52% if you remove the non-tariff barriers alongside the tariffs. So yes, it can revolutionize any African economy. That keys in. That's the point. That keys in. And besides, it has to be a decision to indeed partake in this AfCFTA and enjoy the benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The operative word being and organize any African country that keys in. I totally agree with you, and I accept that that is the way forward. So we will move on to hear from Mr. Ken Opara. Thank you.
Okay.
Have we got Mr. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I actually want to start by congratulating Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce for such a laudable topic at this time, because that's essentially the way to go. Let me start by congratulating Africa for this. I think it's going to be a revolution. And for me, it's going to be a game changer for even small businesses that are operating. If you take the statistics and confirm the fact that in Africa, intra-trade is just within less than 20%, about 16.6%. Elsewhere in Europe is about 70%. In Asia is about 60%. In US, is about 58%. Then that gives you an idea of the potential and opportunities that are here in. And I'm sure that it's definitely going to be a major game changer. For the small businesses, I'm sure that it will be very big opportunity for them to key into this. And then of course, the fact that the market is going to be liberalized. If you take the statistics, you see that almost, most of the small businesses that are operating in Nigeria are, majority of them are in the micro category. So this will be a quantum leap, and I'm sure that it's going to present a whole lot of opportunity for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ken Opara. Indeed, a game changer for small businesses, if we key into it. I'd like to welcome Mr. Akinbiyi Abudu, if you would give us your 3-minute opening remarks. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. And thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege. For me, I think I'll start with my journey so far in Nigeria. I remember when I joined EY back in 2011, I noticed a significant disparity between how Nigerian companies, indigenous companies, manage their tax affairs compared with multinationals that were operating within the country. So while a lot of the Nigerian companies only focus on tax compliance, you had multinational corporations focusing not only on tax compliance, but also on tax planning to ensure their tax operations were done at the most optimal level. Unfortunately, with the increased sophistication of the tax authorities and their increased aggressiveness, Nigerian companies have had to step up their game, so to speak, in that regard, and they've also started looking at tax planning. So it's something it's good news for us. When I look at AfCFTA, that's another, with the enactment of AfCFTA, it gives us another opportunity to close another significant area of disparity in comparison with a lot of multinational corporations. What we find is most multinational corporations are operating in numerous jurisdictions within Africa, while a lot of the African countries are focused primarily on their local jurisdiction. So the market share, market space is much narrower for them. With Africa now, it's an opportunity for everyone to step up and start to look at operating not only within your jurisdiction, but across the different jurisdictions to narrow that gap so much with in terms of competition. And if you don't step up, unfortunately, you're going to be faced with potentially a lot more competition with other African countries then coming into your jurisdiction. So with that, I expect and I hope, I hope and I expect to see a lot of changes in terms of strategy for our indigenous companies, particularly in terms of supply chain management, and also expect to see them hopefully executing that in the most efficient and optimal manner from a tax perspective as well. So it's a really exciting period for me. And like I said, thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abudu. And indeed, you are absolutely right. Tax planning and compliance will be critical for the success of AfCFTA and its members nations, and the changing strategy for, particularly in the supply chain management space, would enhance the process. And last but not the least, I'd like to call on our final speaker, Mr. Olaoluwa Ajala, who would also give us a few minutes of his time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Renu. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, the MBCC team. Thank you. It's a privilege and an honor to be part of this program today. For me, I'm very optimistic about how AfCFTA will impact Nigeria and the African continent as a whole. Nigeria in particular has a lot to offer in terms of goods, in terms of services, and human capital as well. So the AfCFTA initiative is a very great one and a welcome idea, which I believe through the implementation of same will assist and boost the growth of our economy. I look forward to a great and exciting session. Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much. So we will kick off so that we can all have a great and exciting session. I want to start with, and my first questions will be directed to Mr. Francis Anatogu. I would quote Wakeli Mene, the Secretary General of AfCFTA, and he said, "This is not just a trade agreement. This is our hope for Africa to be lifted up from poverty." Now, bearing that profound statement in mind, what opportunities does AfCFTA present to the Nigerian economy, and how is Nigeria positioned to maximize these benefits? Thank you. And whilst we're doing that, please, yeah, we'll encourage people to please keep putting their questions on the chat box. So over to you, Mr. Francis Anatogu.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can look at the opportunities from AfCFTA from multiple dimensions. One is, first of all, export. Now, over the past 10 years, you know how much our currency has devalued. So by participating in export trade, you are hedging, you're protecting your own wealth as a company, as an individual. That is it on one hand. The second opportunity, and like my colleague Demeter mentioned earlier, is that you have opportunity to sell to a much bigger market. And not just the opportunity to sell to a much bigger market. When we did the impact and readiness assessment, we found that those that operate outside, that operate in Africa, earn more margins compared to their domestic transactions. So that's the second thing. The other thing is that in specific areas, we have, there are already products and services where we are exporting to Africa and we can scale up. You know, in terms of Africa imports about 600 billion of goods every year and about almost 200 billion of services every year. And about 80 or 85% of that comes from outside Africa. So by liberalizing, we stand a chance to compete and displace goods from non-African countries. So, and within, there are several areas, several products where we already have advantage. And there are those that the demand is so huge that we cannot ignore. I give you an example. Refined products, Africa import in 2019, I think Africa imported about $60 billion of refined products. Oil and gas is an area where we have a strong, is a dominant area of competitive advantage. And also in some of the food products and even some of the other manufactured products, and of course services, so many services sectors and that we have advantages. So indeed, it's an opportunity for us to, the opportunity is in sending these products and services to Africa, scaling up our businesses at home, employing more people, and then selling to a much wider, a much bigger market. Beyond that, if you also recall that we have a population of about 200 million people. So, and these are skills that can be exported to Africa, and we earn a lot from remittances already, but there's a huge amount to earn from remittances. So across products, services, there are huge opportunities that where Nigeria can participate. And I said earlier that it's an opportunity for every state to be economically viable. Why do I say that? We identify at least 20 products that we've classified as priorities in our various development plans, that Africa imports a minimum of $1 billion of products. So if we take 10% of the share of Africa's import, that is equivalent to doubling our current crude oil export. So indeed, every state can find itself focused on just one product or one service. Rice, for instance, Africa imports about $6 billion of rice. Automobile, about $40 billion of automobiles. So across various areas, the opportunities are there. Now, the question is, how is Nigeria positioned to maximize the benefit? So what we've done at the National Action Committees, first of all, to identify these products and services that are of interest to Nigeria. And we've also identified the specific markets where we can focus. We can't focus on every product or service, and we also can't focus on every market. We've also identified those products where we are already exporting, but we now need to scale. And then those that, the potential is so huge. So, and with this information, we have started engaging various MDAs and business groups. We've also started engaging states to showcase these opportunities and work with them to develop their strategy to be able to go into Africa and win. At National Action Committee, we have also developed our implementation plan. So this is currently undergoing reviews. It's something that needs to have the buy-in on everybody so that collectively we can move. So the reviews are ongoing, and once done, we'll get it approved, and then it becomes our main document for our move to Africa under AfCFTA.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction and great insight. You've said quite a lot of significant things, but before I move to the next question, I want us to just think for a moment around the engagement process. I think it's important that we make this visible enough so that it reaches the right people. Within the Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce, we definitely will be holding you accountable towards that level of engagement by asking the right questions and perhaps inviting you on a one-to-one on behalf of our members to share some of the implementation plan and to actually give us some of the data that the businesses will need to support their participation. Thank you. I'm just going to pause for a second. We're going to draw a poll for a minute. Can I ask all the panelists to also please have their cameras on so that the audience can also see the people on the panel. So the poll is on now. Will the AfCFTA agreement revolutionize the Nigerian economy? Very straightforward one. And what sector do you work in? Can I ask that we will take 2 minutes to just complete the poll? Thank you. We'll pause for 2 minutes and we'll take the question from the next question to Mr. Francis Anatogu. There are a number of questions that are coming up already on our Q&A. We encourage everyone to please participate by dropping their questions in there in the chat box. Okay, I think that we can perhaps almost close the poll now. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So we will close the poll. I have a question from the audience and I'll take that. And it's attention to you, Mr. Francis Anatogu. It's from Mr. Olawale Rashid, the Director of Policy Center for Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So his question goes, how far has Nigeria gone with the implementation of sectoral preparedness plans for AfCFTA? I'll take another question from David Wafor, and he says, how do we ensure that countries closer to Europe, like Morocco and Algeria, will not be used as warehouses to flood Nigeria instead of goods made in Africa? So 2 questions there for you, sir. And I mean, I probably may also attention part of that question to Demeter Yang, but you may want to kick off on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the very first question is about the sectorial implementation plans. So we went through a rigorous process, a number of engagements that started back in August to try to gather the input from stakeholders on what we need to do to benefit from AfCFTA. And we had general sessions, but we also had sectoral engagements to define what we need to do for each sector. So and that is what informed the implementation plan that I talked about. But what you find is that already, even before AfCFTA, there are a number of initiatives that are ongoing, both within specific products and services and sectors. So those ones that are going are ongoing, and we've identified new ones. And this is, again, that's why I say that we have put together, that is now being socialized with the relevant entities, and that involves the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and NACIMA as a whole, because we've got representatives of NACIMA in the National Action Committee. So our expectation is that when this, they will be able, working with them, be able to reach every Chamber of Commerce to get in their input and make sure that we are pushing along the right lines. So that's where we are on that. Now, and in there, by the way, there are those activities that will take, that will complete in the short term. There are those activities that will happen over a much longer term. But just to give you a sense of what we have in there. So there are areas where a key program that we consider a bold action is actually aggregating SMEs, equipping them for export, because about 90% of our businesses are SMEs. So that aggregation and getting that value chain right is a bold action for us. The second thing that we have identified as bold action is really catalyzing domestic demand in a number of areas. Because when we were looking at the market, we found that the Nigerian market is a sizable chunk of the entire African market. So you must make sure that we consolidate our domestic market, even as we're trying to export to Africa. So making sure that we have the local demand that will sustain businesses and then help them, give them that foundation income, if you will, so that they can then have the right foundation to now move into Africa. That's another one. And there are a number of other general and also specific interventions. In terms of stopping countries like Morocco from being warehouses, it's a critical point, and this was one of the points that stakeholders raised, and that one of the points that stalled our joining AfCFTA in March 2018. So, and the thing is that is where the rules of origin comes in. And like you said, Madam Yang will provide the AfCFTA Secretariat's view on that. But the rules of origin negotiation has progressed significantly, and the implementation is now on the way. So it's really making sure that the rules are obeyed. And to that, the agreement is clear on how that will happen. We've already started in Nigerian end to define how to assess companies to ensure that the products meet the rules of origin. So before we send them out, and we expect other countries to do the same, but we still reserve the right when we see or suspect that people are playing games, we reserve the rights to review and flag such injurious practices when they arrive. So, and there is the dispute settlement mechanism under the AfCFTA that we can use to pursue claims against those traders or countries that are violating the rules. So indeed, it's a very robust arrangement under AfCFTA. That said, the implementation would take a while, and it will, like every startup, we will get some things right, but we get some things wrong, but we keep improving and as we go along.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. So perhaps Madam Debita Yang can just give a perspective. And whilst you're taking that point with regards to the question around flooding flooding Nigeria instead of goods made in Africa, I'd also like your perspective around the question that has come through. So it says Nigeria is currently not a producing country. Small and medium businesses do not have power supply, logistics, or road networks to function. So how are we sure other countries will not be cashing into the larger markets and overflood our indigenous market? So you might want to take that, and I think there's a scope in there for response by Mr. Ken Opara as it relates to SMEs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me assure the audience that there is one thing that was foremost in the minds of every member state, the negotiators. Nobody wants transshipment into their market. Nobody wants their market flooded under the pretense of the preference area, but coming from outside. So it was It was uppermost. It is a concern that is shared by all. And when you have a concern that is shared by all, the tendency is that you provide a community-based solution and approach, right? So the AfCFTA rules of origin is very rigid. It is quite rigid. And there is an underlying principle that went into it. And that principle is that wherever you can find productive capacity in Africa, you protect it. The truth is that there is nothing that Africa has, so to say, self-sufficiency in. I mean, you can't say in this one that we are self-sufficient in this particular product, and we can. So that such self-sufficiency does not exist. So, and with that in mind, those who negotiated the rules of origin tried as much as possible via very rigid rules, I must tell you, to protect production capacity in Africa. As long as that product exists in Africa, you try to give it a rule that will maximize its protection, right? So, and it started from the rules making. The AfCFTA rules of origin is not just the general rules. You can have general rules when it comes to rules of origin. So you have the general rules where you have the, okay, wholly obtained, if he has undergone substantive transformation, changed in tariff heading. It also uses the value of non-originating material, as well as processes, complicated processes if the product has undergone that. But then it went beyond that. It decided to have product-specific rules. So while in Annex 2, you have the general rules, you now have Appendix 4 that contains product-specific rules. And it was in recognition that there might be sharp practices. There might be those who perhaps, let me use an example, bring in a shirt, sew on a button and pass it off as originating. There might be those who will bring and repackage and pass it as originating. So you have product-specific rules. So even where you have these general rules, you still have product-specific rules, especially for those products that could easily fall into this kind of arrangements. So the rules of origin are rigid. The reason why it is not yet 100% complete is because member states are still trying to see how best they can protect products that are of interest to their economy. So for now, the rules of origin is just 86% complete. Remarkable achievement, by the way, remarkable achievement, because if you go through the other free trade areas, you will realize that so the benchmark within the WTO is 75%. I mean, if you have 75%, you're good. So it is. So my point is that it is rigid. It is those who have crafted it have tried to block the loopholes, but then you can't always be 100%, not in anything. And because you can't always be 100% in anything, like Mr. Francis mentioned, you have a dispute settlement mechanism.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to move on very quickly to the next, and this is again to you, Mr. Francis Anatogu. So what opportunities, we've talked about the opportunities after presents. So what is Nigeria's preparedness relative to its other African counterparts, please, from where you see?
Okay, thank you very much. I think I like the point that Demeter made about African countries not being self-sufficient in any goods or service. Again, when we did the impact and readiness assessment, we found that most African countries are actually getting into AfCFTA to give them that drive, something to hold on to do what they need to do to industrialize. Mm-hmm. When we looked at the manufacturing and the value add in the economies of African countries, only a couple compare rank at the same level as Nigeria, and those ones are the likes of South Africa, Egypt, and Morocco, maybe one or two more. So Nigeria, compared to most African countries, Nigeria is really high up there. Now, that is not to say that if you now come home and look at it from the perspective of how much we are exporting, yes, we currently is still dominated by oil, but across sectors, across states, everybody is, I dare say that there's that broad understanding that we now need to do export. So, and there are a lot of actions, there are a lot of push towards getting export to happen. And the indicator that I saw a couple of months ago is their statement from the MD of MPA that they were struggling to process about 800 containers of export bound products. Because what that tells what that tells me is that not only is the awareness there, it is already happening. And because we have not been exporting for a long time, we're not exporting that much. Yes, there are processes. The export process is not as clear, it's not as understood as our import process. So there are things we are now relearning. We are now clearing the dust, taking out the cobwebs, preparing the warehouses, understanding the processes for us to export. And by the way, a number of people, when they exported without understanding the rules, there were a lot of rejects. And those people that encounter rejects are now learning what needs to be done so that they can export. So indeed, compared to other African countries, Nigeria, for some of them, Nigeria is very much better prepared. For others, yes, we lag. But again, it is not just products. If you think about services, now let's look at the financial services. Nigerian banks are all over Africa. In terms of creative services, there are Nollywood, our music, and entertainment sector is out there. Now, if you also now start thinking of fintech, for instance, again, you see Nigerian players out there. But even as well as we are performing, or relatively, there's still a lot more opportunity, and now businesses would now need to look at these opportunities and identify the ones where they can play in. Now, as part of our state sensitization and working with the states to develop their strategies, we've visited about 6 states so far, and what is clear is that every state in Nigeria now is making tremendous effort to boost their IGR. They're making tremendous effort to grow their productive capacity. Now, in our engagement to them, what we are adding to that is, as you're boosting your capacity, look at these are the products that Africa requires in large quantities. Figure out where you want to play in those. Choose one. We're not saying choose 2 or 3, just choose one and try to grow capacity to export as much as $1 billion of that product to Africa, and support the businesses to be able to export. So indeed, so we're not starting from ground zero. We are better than some countries. We have challenges in infrastructure. We have challenges in the operating environment that you cannot wish away. They are there, but even in spite of all of this, companies are already exporting to Africa, and more are looking at Africa.
Okay, thank you very much for that. There are quite a number of questions on our Q&A. I'd encourage the panelists to also go and look at it. But I would like to sort of move quickly to Demitaniang. We've got a few questions for you. But before I have ask the questions I have scheduled for you, there's some questions here that I think may be good to answer for us. Since Britain is no longer part of the EU, how does this affect the success of AfCFTA export performance to its closest foreign market Europe in the future? And I will also perhaps ask Mr. Ken Okpara to give us a perspective on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, if I get the question correctly, Brexit, how does it affect AfTA?
To that extent, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so first and foremost, let me say once again that AfTA is African Continental Free Trade Area. It is trade, it is intra-Africa trade. That's what AfTA is. How AfTA countries, member states, would relate to third parties is spelled out in the agreement. And it's not as specific to any particular region or country, just third parties. So there are specified codified rules on how member states relate in terms of trade to third parties as far as the AfCFTA is concerned. So I guess that that's it. That's it. So for instance, if you go to the most favored nation, you would have to trade from the member state. You have to trade with Britain under the most favored nation provision. That's what it will be. Yeah. Okay. And then let me maybe also use this opportunity to add that the AfCFTA does not stop a state party from negotiating an agreement with a third party. It only has provisions for what you do when you have done that, which is if you give them a better preference than what you have offered your fellow state parties, yeah, you will have to allow your fellow state parties to have access to that privilege. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to move on very quickly. I'm so conscious of time. I want to direct and can I please request again that all our panelists please leave their videos on throughout the session. I'm directing a number of questions to you, Mr. Ken Okpara, for response. So what opportunities does the AfTA present to Nigerian MSMEs? How should MSMEs be positioned to benefit from this agreement in the short to long term? I'm going to bulk my questions so that we can get effective response and better time management. So what interventions or initiatives should the government develop to help MSMEs compete under the AfTA? And then the other question that I want to pose to you is, MSMEs are key to increasing intra-African trade and shared economic growth. How should financial institutions address financing challenges and an urgent implementation of harmonized financial sector policy? So, I mean, if you can sort of take those questions collectively, that would help. And then I would move on to Mr. Akibi Abudu swiftly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Annie. Actually, that's a very important question. Just talking about the opportunities that this AfTA presents to small businesses, and that this is key. I think Francis had earlier talked about the number of SMEs, and then of course the fact that this represents a major opportunity. This is key because if you look at the total size of business in Nigeria, you recognize the fact that SMEs represent 96% of total businesses in Nigeria. And they also contribute close to 50%, about 49% of the GDP. However, when it comes to export, you discover that they do less than 10% of the total export, out of Nigeria. So the point then is, how will they, how will this be an opportunity for them? How will they position there? I think the first point is to, emphasize the fact that this will provide them with access to the market, and this is very important because, they now have a large market of 1.2 billion population, that would provide opportunity for them to be able to, deal with. And this is very key because if you look at the structure of SME and the fact that they have limited scope, you then discover that they, with this liberalization of the market, it will provide an opportunity for them, to access other markets outside Nigeria, and that's quite huge, as much as important. The other point to state also is the fact that, of course, they will have reduction in tariff, which of course, has been said earlier. Don't also forget that the fact that SMEs, the cost of doing business, is just, we say is quite high, of course, in Nigeria. And SME, they need to operate in an environment where the costs, because the cost margin, of course, is quite high. So they need to operate in a very thin margin. And in doing that, what it means clearly is that they need to crash the cost of operation and as much as possible. So in so doing, what it then means is that, by this reduction in tariff, of course, that obviously will help them to access, at a profitable and, manner as much as possible. The other important point to, state is the fact that it will have, give them access to also have cheaper sources of raw materials, within the African country. Remember also that, right now, African country, most of the export that you see are essentially in raw material and semi-manufactured form. And when you look at this, you discover that the value you get is just 10% of what it should be if you had processed this and then be able to then export them. So clearly that, of course, would help them present a very good opportunity, and then, of course, give them access to this, raw material. Let me give you an instance. If you look at Nigeria today, you look at cocoa, you discover that the species of cocoa that we export, especially the raw cocoa beans, is actually one of the best in terms of the quality. But if you take a place like South Africa and Egypt, of course, that's where that's involved in manufacture of chocolate and all those components. So with this opportunity, you can then be able to move it there as a hub, and then take advantage of that rather than now trying to just export raw material at each state. So this will be a good opportunity for them to be able to do that. And of course, they will then have access to raw material as much as possible. Now, it's also important to state the fact that the moment they are able to do this, you have opportunity to have what we call technology transfer, as much as possible. Nigeria, of course, if you look at the IT, the level in Nigeria, you see that even the content as much as possible and the apps is actually quite high. So it presents opportunity for them to also export this. So what you see will be, I see an opportunity that Nigeria will be a regional, a regional manufacturing hub, that all of that, other countries would, of course, be able to, come in, bring in their raw materials, and of course, Nigeria will be able to do that. This is essentially what China did, essentially for Europe and US, in the past, and that's why they were able to have the likes of all those big companies, because then they were able to outsource their, manufacturing in those locations because of the fact that, the obvious, problem of, cost in their local environment, and as much as possible. So you are going to have advantages that is also going to come there. In terms of how SMEs obviously will be positioned to take advantage of this, that's very, very key, because part of what we think SMEs we are, going to be doing is to be able to arrange themselves in clusters, and that's very, very key, and take advantage of shared facilities. The major problems as it relates to cost of doing business for SMEs, and of course the larger corporate businesses is the fact that infrastructural, costs are quite huge. Now, what we think that should then happen is that the small businesses should take advantage of sharing these services on a platform rather than having to engage and buy, all those equipment. I give you an instance. In Aba, for instance, we had what they call the shoe and leather, market, of course. And then there's a common facility center that now help them. Some of them may not be able to acquire those equipments because they are quite expensive, but with those facilities, they are going to take advantage of that, produce a lot of, sizable and multi, qualities that would just help them to also be very, very competitive, which I think that's, very, very important. The other point to state is the fact that, it will also be important that in terms of quality and branding, this is also an area, because somebody was talking about flooding the market and become an area that will be dumping. But what this will do essentially is that it will help the SMEs to begin to pay attention to branding. Branding is not just about having to take it, it's about positioning for relevance. And you can, as much as possible, try to do that. During the COVID, it will surprise you that because a company was able to have a website properly structured, they were able to have, subscription to supply all these PPP and some other items that most of these companies, and they just ordered that online. And this was a company that was not doing very well. So this will also help them to, as much as possible, get that. In terms of also talking about how government obviously would, help to support them, we recognize also that government has, as much as possible, tried to support in some of the key areas. Essentially, we've seen the tax incentive, which of course under the new act, that has been renewed, they have been able to just give some tax holiday for those SMEs. We think that of course will as much as possible continue. And then of course what government has also done through central bank is to create the National Collateral Registry, so that small businesses can have opportunity to borrow without necessarily having to talk about having to have properties and legal mortgage as much as possible. But beyond that is what government should further do. So we think that government should, as much as possible, create an industrial cluster. What an industrial cluster does is very, 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 enormous. What it means is that if you have that industrial cluster, you will see those that are involved in processing. At the back end of it are those who are coupling, and then are those other there. So the cost of doing business is actually crashed in as much as possible. So this way is you now be able to have that. In India, in some of these other countries, you see that those industrial centers, clusters, help them to maximize, their output, reduce costs, and minimize, the cost of operation, because that's, of course, is also very important. Another area for export, which provides opportunity for them, is to have what we call a centralized processing export hub. You don't need to go to NAFDAC. After you have traveled from NAFDAC, you now go to standard organization. You just have a one-stop location. Once they are able to process, at NAFDAC, they just walk into the same location, conclude that, and within 48 hours, their goods are already ready for export. And that way, it helps to also, fast track the process and turn around time as much as possible. So by and large, we believe that it presents a whole lot of opportunity for, for the industry, and then for small businesses, to compete effectively. For the banks also, as much as possible, is to also support them in the areas relating to having to create, low-cost funds. But in creating low-cost funds is to help them build capacity, which is very important. A key challenge, for instance, for small businesses has been in the area of how they are structured, and as much as possible. So it is important to be able to build up their capacity and then support them with the kind of funding that will just help them to do that. In Europe, for instance, we of course have what we call the European Credit Guarantee Scheme. And that's essentially talking about the fact that exports that moved within the other country, the moment you finish producing, you have, you see them providing funding and then guaranteed to those, where they borrow those funds.
Yeah.
What it helps them is it provides them with that opportunity. And I think that's the way to go. Thank you.
That's very helpful, Mr. Opara. A lot of insight in there. And the questions are coming faster than we can actually cope with. But a lot of them are forming a theme, which I'm picking up. And it's really talking about the exposure of not creating an environment where indigenous SMEs and MSMEs are exposed. So that's something that I think we need to think about in terms of how we support them around manufacturing, around capacity building, around preparing for branding, around and all the various obstacles that they would naturally encounter. But I want to move very quickly to Mr. Akinbi Abudu. You also touched on the tax implications of the tax advantages that are possible. So Mr. Abudu, as an accomplished tax consultant and business leader, please help us here. What are the tax implications of AfCFTA for Nigeria and Nigerian businesses? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me start by saying there are actually, in terms of what is being trying to achieve, I actually envision 3 steps to it. This is the first step. The first step is free movement of goods within Africa. The next step would be services, which is the free provision of services within Africa. And the last step would be free movement of people in terms of immigration. So in terms of taxation, we're really only talking about customs right now, in terms of the revenue that we get from customs. So as indicated, part of the push for this, the incentive, is that you can then sell your products, you can import or export your products to other African countries without paying a duty. So which makes it easy and incentivizes you to expand your business into all those other jurisdictions. There's one question you didn't ask, but one of the questions you get is, what about the loss of revenue for Nigeria? To answer that, interestingly, based on some of the comments that I've said and some of my other panelists have said, if you look at our current space right now, most of our transactions are with multinational corporations. So essentially our imports are from Europe, from Asia and whatnot. So as long as we get the rules of origin correct, so that they're not dumping their products or going sideways actually to transfer it through Africa, then we should not see any loss of revenue from the revenues that we're currently getting in terms of customs. So that should stay stable. So essentially, what we probably want to do, we already have incentives for manufacturing. We have the pioneer status for entry into new industries. We may want to look at that again, maybe expand that some more in terms of trying to get that on the way. We also want to start looking at double tax treaty agreements. Right now, we have no treaties with any African country except for South Africa. That is something that probably it needs to be looked into. So there's going to be a lot of other aspects of taxation that needs to go with this. The other point that I think is very important to note is, I think we're still looking at it from a jurisdictional perspective. The whole thing is to look at Africa as one country. So companies need to start thinking about, listen, and that's why I mentioned supply chain. Do I need to have everything in one jurisdiction? Probably the answer would be no. So I could have my manufacturing hub something in one country. I can have my IP located in another country where I can better exploit and develop that IP. And then I can have distribution in different countries that I'm actually selling it into. So countries need to, and that's how the multinational corporations that are competing with us, that is how they think, that is how they structure their businesses. So we need to start thinking about that in terms of strategy so that we can truly exploit and take advantage of this great opportunity. That's my response. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to quickly move on to Mr. Olaoluwa Ajala, because I want everyone to sort of participate in the conversation. And I'll kick off with a question before I take a few more questions from the Q&A. So to what extent does the Nigerian private international law support trade liberalization agenda of AfCFTA? Mr. Olaoluwa Ajala, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Green. Okay, basically, Nigeria is a party to so many treaties and all, but pertaining to private international law, there's still a lot to be done. For example, if we take the Hague Convention, Conference and Convention as an example, the Evidence and Service Convention, which will help our procedural laws when it comes to civil and commercial cases, is yet to be worked on. The Choice of Court Convention as well, and the Judgment Convention. There's a lot to be done in the Nigerian private international law circle. We have a lot of good but the implementation, so our justice system, for example, how can a foreign person or business person have confidence in our judicial system? Do we have respect for the rule of law and certain things? So these are factors we need to consider when it comes to private international law. It's not enough to sign those agreements and treaties, but domesticate them, enforce them, and follow up with the implementation. Even locally, we have issues with enforcement of judgment. For example, ECOWAS, we have it in Abuja and all that. When they give a judgment, enforcement is always an issue. So when it comes to private international law in Nigeria, especially in the light of AfCFTA, but there's a lot to be done, both by the government, private individuals, and the legal profession generally. So we need to put a lot of effort into this to ensure that our justice system is transparent, is fair, is timely, and everybody goes away happy at the end of the day. Justice did not. Pardon?
So perhaps on that note, can you explain what the dispute resolution framework is for AfCFTA?
Okay, for AfCFTA, we have a dispute, which is one of the protocols on AfCFTA. It says that the process should be accountable, transparent, fair, and predictable. So these are the elements of the protocol on AfCFTA. So like I said, in Nigeria in particular, we need to look at our dispute resolution system particularly. For example, our court system still needs a lot of work to be done. We need to focus more on ADR, alternative dispute resolution, so that most of the cases we have in courts will not end up in court. Court should be the last resort, not the point of first instance. So if we're going to comply with the dispute resolution system protocol under AfCFTA, we need a lot of work to be done. For example, it takes an average of 3 to 4 years or 4 to 5 years sometimes to conclude a civil matter, talk less of a criminal matter. So these are the issues and areas that needs to be worked on if Nigeria is going to benefit properly from AfCFTA. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to throw out a few questions to each of the panelists here. So there's a question here that says that what has been the rate of growth of intra-ECOWAS trade, and how is this an indicator for intra-African trade under AfCFTA? I'll pose that question to you, Mr. Francis Anatogu. The next question I'd like to raise is, AfCFTA is definitely a potential changer for African countries that engage in a resourceful manner. Is there a central engagement mechanism that the AfCFTA Secretariat that helps individual countries get their internal acts in order? And I think you will see that the theme is coming across around engagement, around communication, around clarity. The next, and that question is actually going to you again, sir, Mr. Anatogu, because I think that's more appropriate for you. I'd also now look at the question that is coming, in addition to the current poor state of infrastructure that is of great challenge to manufacturing, the state of insecurity has further compounded the capacity of few struggling MSMEs and manufacturers to produce today. How can Nigeria optimize opportunities that AfCFTA I portend, and how would our companies navigate this challenge? I'd like to pose that to Mr. Ken Okpara, and I will take two more for which are directly to Ms. Yang. The first one is, it's been 6 months since AfCFTA took off. Is there a panel member, perhaps Mrs. Demitanyang, who can state how much Nigeria has contributed to trade so far? And then the final one again to you, Ms. Yang, is how accurate is it to say that the trade agreement has been off to a slow start, considering 6 months and little or nothing is known in its operation? So I've thrown a few questions out there to my learned panelists. Can we start off with you, Mr. Francis Anatogu, with your responses? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the very first question was trade, ECOWAS trade, and how and whether we can correlate that with AfCFTA. Yes, ECOWAS account for, I think it's about, not very sure now, between about 19% of intra-Africa trade. But the thing is, that is sizable in itself. Now, ECOWAS is made up of 15 countries, and a number of which are least developed countries. So, as good and as attractive as ECOWAS is, in some areas the market is not in ECOWAS. And a good example is financial services. So the bulk of the market for financial services is in the rest of Africa. So in some areas, yes, ECOWAS is good, and ECOWAS is a priority market for us because there are certainly goods and services that we need to extend our market reach within ECOWAS. But the important thing to note is that Africa is much bigger. The opportunities, depending on the product and services, may be in different countries. If you take a look and ask yourself the top 10 African countries, and you want to focus on them, then you'll be thinking about the South African market, India, Egyptian market, Moroccan market, and a couple of others. So yes, our approach is prioritize the domestic market, prioritize ECOWAS, because again, under ECOWAS, we have gone, the regional integration has gone much further. So even trade and services has a better chance of moving smoothly than in the rest of Africa, because that is still being negotiated or being implemented as we speak. So, but the important thing is to note that the African market is much bigger, it's far more diverse than ECOWAS. Now, the second point about common engagement structure. So again, yes, the AfCFTA Secretariat is there. Negotiations and implementation planning is happening there. So yes, there is that common platform. And even for us being part of the ECOWAS, ECOWAS provides even another level of planning. And within both the AfCFTA and ECOWAS, at the meetings, we member states are required to provide updates on their planning, on their progress, and that is discussed, and challenges are also discussed. So yes, there are those structures and those platforms for member states to understand what one another is doing. So I think that's 2 questions for me.
Correct, yes. I'll move over to Mr. Ken Okpara. Please, let's be brief and succinct in our responses so that we can capture as much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the question that asked is how Nigeria can, and the small businesses can navigate, the problems. Talked about infrastructure, then about security. Of course, that's very critical. Essentially, if you want to basically be efficient and then competitive. Yeah, so the point for us is the fact that Africa represents a huge market opportunity. Then when you look at the small businesses, essentially, in Nigeria, for instance, let's pick that. You discover that we have areas that we have very competitive advantage. And then if you take areas like, the entertainment sector, as much as possible, the ICT, of course, the technology applications and all the rest of them, you see that these are the areas that represent a whole lot of opportunity. So what we see here is basically that as this, even when we are talking about security challenges, it presents also opportunity for small businesses to, as much as possible, export their services in an organized manner. And that, of course, represents a lot of value. And let me give you an instance for, given the situation that we found ourselves, you now discover that even those that are involved in logistics services, essentially from here to other West African coast, are doing so much as you can see. And what that means is that if this opportunity would help them to expand their market focus, and then, of course, be able to reach a larger number of people. Security, yes, is a major issue, but of course, it's been addressed. Don't also forget that some of the companies today, that, following what we had during the COVID, we had a discussion on the supply chain. But today, you can see that some of those companies are trying to set up in Nigeria. Why? Because it presents a whole major opportunity. And I said to you that it's for the SME to focus on trying to structure well, make sure that their branding is properly done, and then, of course, put the right kind of framework. Once that is done, you'll be sure that, of course, it will enhance the value of what they offer to the market and enhance their earning. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, and Ms. Yang, if you can come back to us on those specific questions to you.
Okay, thank you very much. On engagement, on how the Secretariat is engaging our stakeholders, being state parties in this, in making sure that the benefits of AfCFTA will trickle down. I can say it for the Secretary General, he has had extensive engagements. He has had extensive engagements within state parties where he ensures that he talks to stakeholders within each state party on things that need to be done so that the benefits of AfCFTA can trickle down. And the Secretariat has prioritized a whole lot of activities towards this. And the Secretariat in the prioritized activities will be working with export promotion councils of member states to ensure that that particular exporter is able to export within the AfCFTA preference area, because that's when you begin to count the successes. So and then part of this prioritization is also customs, because the main agency for the implementation of the agreement is actually customs. So at the Secretariat end, we have a whole lot of activities planned, that within the customs administration, and one of it is really capacity building to some extent, but in terms of what is contained in the agreement, what the field officer should know about the agreement, the rights and obligations of those who will be utilizing the agreement. And then a process of harmonization of processes and procedures within the customs administration, and then a process of trying to computerize and make sure that there's interoperability of between the systems used by different customs administration. And then in terms of, it's not right to say it's been slow. I'll answer that question directly. So it will not be a correct statement to say it's been slow. What will be correct is to say it is a process, and the process is on. And this is a process that involves national laws. Whether you are able to export under the AfCFTA will to some extent involve your national laws. It's a process that involves national laws. It's a process that involves customs infrastructure. And then it is a process that involves the readiness of the exporters themselves to take advantage of the market that has been created. So it is a process, and that process is on. And that process, has come a long way this 6 months.
Okay, I think people are very anxious. The MSMEs are very anxious. I think we've talked shop for quite a bit, so you can understand the reasoning around those questions. But just another quick one directed to you. Did AfCFTA carry along the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria? And then just on the same, by the same token, if you can answer that for me, there's a question mark over free trade zones and specific economic zones with respect to AfCFTA. What is the current agreement on the status of free trade zones? And I would also perhaps seek Mr. Abudu's input on that score, or any other panelists who are able to prefer answers to those two questions. But I'll kick off with you, Ms. Yang.
Okay, I'll go straight to economic zones, the free zones.
Yes.
It's still an outstanding issue within the AfCFTA. When the AfCFTA was signed, it was signed with built-in agenda, and the status of special economic zones was part of the built-in agenda within the AfCFTA. Conversations are on. The Article 23 on special economic zones within the Protocol of Trading Goods requests Council of Ministers to produce a guideline that would be used, the regulations that will be used for special economic zones. So it's still an ongoing conversation. It has not been finalized. It's still there on the table. So that is the status of that. And then in terms of whether AfCFTA carried Manufacturers Association of Nigeria along, I will think Mr. Francis should answer that because that's now at a national level. But then what I can tell you is that at the level of the continent itself, national consultations and stakeholder engagement is usually provided for in between meetings. So when we work out a calendar of meetings, you give room, you give space for national consultation, and it comes out as that. So for instance, you say we hold a meeting of Committee on Trading Goods, you'll find somewhere in between that committee meeting and perhaps that there is room for national consultations. And I believe that's where stakeholders and the interested parties are carried along by countries.
Okay. Just before Mr. Francis Anatogu answers the question, I'd like to just add this to your response. Chibuzo Nwabwe from Anambra State, Ministry of Economic Planning, she's asking, please, in what area will the state governments benefit from AfCFTA, especially as it regards improving the state's capacity for internally generated revenue? I asked that question because I know you talked about engagements have begun with the state. So maybe you can answer those two questions, Mr.
Okay, so when I say engagement has begun.
No, sorry, I am reference to, this is for Mr. Natogu.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the Manufacturers Association, yes, they are part of the National Action Committee at the steering level and at the technical level. And we have been working with them. And even in the sensitization, as we go to every state, we work with the national body to identify their counterparts at the states that we pull together to discuss what AfCFTA is about. So MAN, NASIMA, NASI, NASMI, name all of them, they are all carried along and they are all represented at the National Action Committee at both steering and technical levels. Then on the question from Anambra State, by the way, we should be going to Anambra State by the end of this month. Indeed, when specifically on Anambra State, we have had a number of engagement with your SSG. And how would AfCFTA be of benefit? Anambra, for instance, has made attempts. You have competitive advantage in a number of areas, auto sector, in agriculture, you have rice, you have vegetables and all of that. And these are areas where you can prioritize, and you're already prioritizing and taking steps to export. So indeed, it's all about export, and the export creates jobs, and jobs creates opportunity for taxes, permits, duties for the state government. So that is how we can relate it to IGR. So, and we're already working with Anambra and other states in this area. And that's a simple answer.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to look to Mr. Akimbi Abudu now, just for two questions, and I hope you are able to support us. Is there any synergy between NEPC and AfCFTA? And then the second question to you, I feel like this is a question from Dipo Adebo. I feel that Nigeria is quite strong in the services sector, banking, medical, engineering, real estate. How can Nigeria benefit from AfCFTA in these areas? Services can be a major revenue area for Nigeria. I hope you're able to pick that.
Yes, thank you. I'll start with the second question, and hopefully you can explain what I wasn't sure what the NNEC stands for.
NEPC. I'm not sure myself.
I apologize. I'm not sure what that is.
What it is, Nigerian Export Promotion Council.
That's correct.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Olaoluwa, Ajala, you can take that question for us as well later. Once, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay.
All right, so
no, sorry, please go on. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Could you repeat the second question, please? Thank you.
Okay, so I have to, so the second question was with regards to Nigeria is quite strong in the services sector, banking, medical, engineering, real estate, and so on. So how can Nigeria benefit from AfCFTA in these areas? Services can be a major revenue area for Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much. So I think I alluded to this interestingly earlier, where I said there's a three-part I anticipated three-part transitional period. So the first part really is focused on goods. But if you look at the objectives of AfCFTA, it's noted there as part of that is services. But right now, services are not covered because services are really under in terms of taxation and whatnot, under corporate income taxes as opposed to customs. So for now, it's not covered. But I presume and hope that either we see from a matching in terms of double tax treaty agreements that would cover services, or an expansion of AfCFTA to actually have rules in that regard in the future. I think it's a very important point, given our population size. One of our competitive advantage, obviously, is the size of our population and the size of the services industry that we have. So for now, unfortunately, it doesn't appear that's going to be covered in the first impact.
Okay, I'll come over to you, Mr. Olaoluwa Ajala, if you can sort of answer the other question. Thanks.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please, if you don't mind?
I have to say I have lost that question, but perhaps I can direct the NEPC question to you, Mr. Anatogo, and I'll come back to you, Mr.
Okay. So again, NEPC is part of the National Action Committee. The ED of MS is a champion for export development work stream. So, and indeed, it's important to mention the role of the National Action Committee is to bring everybody together, because what needs to be done requires different agencies working and pulling together so that we are coordinated. So, but it doesn't take away the mandate of each of those MDAs, and they're all part of the National Action Committee. I think let me also react. Trade in services is actually there's under the Phase 1 agreement. There's a protocol on trade in services. So really, it is part of the AfCFTA. Yes, there are optimization required in terms of harmonizing regulations and so on to unlock that or make it as easy as possible to trade in services. Yes, double tax treaty is one of them. Mutual recognition agreement is another one. Harmonizing the rules really around services is all part of AfCFTA, and these are all being worked on as we speak. And lastly, on the medical, yes, a part of the implementation plan captured medical as one of those areas where we can push into Africa. And the objective or the program here is targeting specific diseases and try to be the center of excellence in those.
Thank you very much. So we're just gradually coming to the close of the session. I would like to take just a summary, just one question from Mr. Kitemi, who's on the panel with us here. And then we will close with each member of the panel giving us one word towards the future success and opportunities that AfCFTA hold to interested parties. So Mr. Kitemi, are you online?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Ms. Rido. I would probably be looking at Mr. Okpara or probably Mr. Anatogo to answer this. And it has to do with the FX side of trade, particularly in terms of currencies across. I don't know if Ms. Giang too can look at this. How ready are we, particularly when it comes to the currency control and movement across the borders? I don't know who would be more appropriate to, or who wants to take it on. It looks like Ms. Giang is ready to.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't quite ready to really, because that's a difficult one you asked and then you pushed it at me. You know? It was that recognition that made me smile. I'm like,
oh, okay.
Okay, so but to say that we are not yet at that stage, right? Is it after it's a gradual thing? It's a graduated levels of integration that we would take all the way through. When we get to that level, when we can start talking of a single currency, we might.
Let's look at, okay, sorry to interrupt. Perhaps Mr. Kimbi Abudu can give us a start and would also pose that question to Mr. Francis Anatogo. It's a very important one. Mr. Abudu, are you on? Thank you.
Yes, apologies, I'm on. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? Apologies for that.
Okay, it's actually about how we would handle foreign currency movements, considering the fact that most countries today are running different currencies, apart from the CFA, which is synonymous with the Francophone countries. How is that going to work, and what are the restrictions or hindrances that we anticipate?
All right, thank you very much. That's a fantastic question. I think let me start off by saying, if you look at our FX situation right now, over 90% of our FX comes from sale of crude oil, right? And yet only 7%, around 7% of our GDP comes from that. So that's why we have this huge issue in terms of FX. So generally speaking, now to answer your question, we're thinking this should hopefully boost the FX for our country, because all international trade generally is done in one of the common foreign currencies, e.g. US dollar, euros, or pounds. So essentially, those transactions would most likely be done in those easily transferable and common currencies. So if we have a lot more transactions, a lot more exports going to some of these African countries as we expand our borders and trade, then that will help in terms of the pressures of FX. And we have other sources of FX as we increase our GDP as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, sorry, may I jump in? Because I might need to highlight the Pan-African payment system that is part of the instruments that was used to operationalize the AfCFTA. So it offers you a payment system that if I am buying goods in Naira, if I'm buying goods from Nigeria, for instance, from Ghana, I can pay in Naira and the Ghanaian will receive it in cedi. So that cuts off the cost of transactions, moving to the dollar, then to move to whatever currency. Yeah, I just needed to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll just get Mr. Anatogo in his wrap up to give us an answer to that question. Thank you.
No, I think Mrs. Giang's answer is what I would have given. because that's really the payment settlement system, which the AfCFTA Secretariat is working with our pre-exim to operationalize. So that is it. And I think in the closing remark is to say, indeed, the AfCFTA is a transformational program. And in fact, I can't recall any other program that has received the kind of political will that we have on AfCFTA. And it is a marathon. This is an agreement that would guide how we trade over very long term. It is an agreement that would help that prepare every African country, including Nigeria, on how to prepare to trade with the rest of the world. So there's a lot of new programs, new projects, new activities associated with AfCFTA. So it is a major learning process for everybody. So the infrastructure that we seek, some of them are already being worked on, but others will come over the medium to long term program. And if you put it in perspective, these infrastructure, as bad as they are, those issues will be resolved over a shorter period compared to the agreement. So we are starting, we are moving, and thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are just coming to a close now. Just 1 minute from each member of the panel in terms of your closing remarks. I'll go with Ms. Demeter Yang next, please.
Thank you. Just to say that the AfCFTA is the structural transformation that Africa needs to get to its desired destination. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And to you, Mr. Akimbi Abudu.
Thank you. I think for me, it's just to understand this is not a short-term thing. This is long-term. As you can see, there are a lot of things that are still being worked on and ironed out. But I think the objectives are really great, and hopefully it can take us to the next level of development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then of course, to Mr. Olaoluwa Ajala. I'm not sure if he's still on the call.
Yes, I am.
Oh, yes, you are. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So for me, I hope to see a lot of collaboration between the private sector and the government to achieve the objective of AfCFTA. And I hope that our government will work on our infrastructure so that Nigeria can benefit maximally and also take a leadership role in the implementation of AfCFTA. Thank you.
Excellent. I hope I have not missed anyone out. On that note, I want to say a very big thank you to I do apologize, Mr. Ken. I couldn't see you. That's why I wanted the pictures up. I couldn't see you on there. Please, last but not the least, can I have your closing remark, please?
Okay, thank you. Just to say that AfCFTA is actually a revolution indeed, and we should all support that. There'll be a lot of extensive collaboration along all the various institutions. On the part of government, there's much to be done. On the part of the business community, there's much. But I strongly believe with this size of the market, the potentials are quite huge. All we need to do is to dot the I's and I, and I'm sure we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I first of all want to applaud everyone who's been actively participating on this today's webinar. It's been a very excellent interactive session, if I dare say. We promised it was going to be impactful. We believe that that has come through with a line of questions, and we have quite a number of unanswered questions. We will be collating those questions, so please watch out. They will be collated with formal responses and placed on the NBCC website for continuity and confirmation. And I did say at the beginning that Mr. Francis Anatogu, you are our closest to the government, so we will be holding you and following the story with you in terms of the progress on AfCFTA. I mean, I think there have been quite a lot of things that have been discussed today. I think quite clearly the communication strategy needs to be looked at. We need to think about the enabling environment, particularly for our MSMEs and our SMEs to ensure they participate fully, considering where they are within the overall sector. We need to think about Nigeria obviously playing a leading role and influencing that very much needed drive to make AfCFTA a success. You know, as obviously I echo and I share the comments by I think Mr. Jala, who said collaboration between the private sector and the government is critical on this matter, even as they improve the infrastructure. The financial institutions have a key role to play as well in making sure that AfCFTA is a success. And I know that Mr. Okpara did profess some very clear solutions, things including things like creating clusters, you know, to enable the businesses to thrive, looking at the currency and the interface between the various countries. So those are some things that I hope we can take away from today's discussions and begin to have that engagement to ensure that we can successfully bed in AfCFTA. You know, quite a number of people are anxious. We're anxious because we really want it to work, and we believe that it really can be a success. On that note, on behalf of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, there will be a formal vote of thanks, but I personally want to lend my thank you to each of the panelists. You've certainly done justice to the subject. You've proven that you are subject matter experts, and I'm sure that your profiles will be out there for all those who have joined online, who can approach you directly to actually get some more information or participate on the journey as we progress. Thank you very much once again, and God bless you. I would like to hand you over now to for the vote of thanks, and I believe that Mr. Nnamdi Okonkwo will be doing the vote of thanks. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Anne Reno. Let me start by, on behalf of the President, the Council members, and ESCO members of NBCC, I'd like to thank all of you. 135 people participating. It actually gladdens our hearts that when we called, you answered. But I would like to go one by one and thank especially the panelists, Mr. Francis Anatogu, Madam Demita Gyang, Mr. Ken Opara, Mr. Akimbiyi Abudu, Mr. Olaoluwa Ajala, and our very strong, indefatigable Madam Anne Reno. I'd like to be a chairman like you, very effective in moderating. The patrons and council members, and again, the 135 attendees. I'd like to also especially thank the advocacy committee and the secretariat of NBCC for always putting up a good event. So thank you all. And I also want to use this opportunity to inform you of our upcoming events. On June 6th at 2 p.m., we'll be having a session titled Meet the Governor of Lagos State. In this webinar, our governor will be talking to us, and I invite all of you once more to please join us. On the 24th of June at 12 noon, oil and gas event themed gas economy, maximizing the potentials. That's holding on Thursday, June 24th, like I said earlier. Finally, if you're interested in becoming a member of the chamber, please visit our website. And so you can enjoy what those of us who are there are currently enjoying, knowledge-wise, business connections, advocacy, etc., etc. Finally, please follow us on our social media platforms to get to know about our other activities. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much, and I'd like to bring it to an end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and God bless everyone.
Thank you.